Good morning, all, or happy lunchtime for my friends in South Downs and the others of you living in the future. And welcome to Kalbardr's Corner for this episode of Coffee with Cal. I am Lord Kalbardr Gellir, Companion of the Meridian Cross, Companion of the Argent Comet, Companion of the Argent Lamp, Companion of the Falcon's Faith, and Reaper, coming to you live, as always, from the Barony of the Osprey on the southern coast of Meridies. Now, for this episode, I am joined by, once again, by the Baron of Carrigbon, Thegn Samson Muskovich. Good morning, Your Excellency.
Hello. So I'm actually one of two barons. Our barony has two barons.
Correct.
So that's one of the reasons actually why I used Thegn.
Which it's a cooler title, anyways. It fits the persona better. I like it. So
it does. That's what sort of. There's a whole story with that, but that's a whole other conversation.
Later episode, yeah.
Anyways.
So, Sammy, if you will, give us a little bit about you, a little bit of your background, and then we'll dive into the other bits of this.
Okay, so I am currently one of the two landed barons of the Barony of Carrigbon. We are situated roughly about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from Chicago. Our next door neighbor is actually the Barony of Ayrton, which is where Chicagoland is. So northern Illinois area. I actually have to think about that crap. I'm recipient of 2 royal augmentations, one for being a member of the SCA 50-year watch team. I was actually the overnight watch captain for most of that event. And then also because I was a scribe during the reign of William and Isolde, where I think we made somewhat over like 500 scrolls. Like all of the scribes of the kingdom that participated received a royal augmentation. And then I'm also a member of the order, or I'm sorry, I'm a recipient rather of the award of the Sapphire. I had to think about if it's an order or not, but it's not. Which is the Mid-Realms Non-Armigerous Award for courtesy. And that was, yeah. So, yeah,
I like that one. There.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I actually have a little tiny sapphire that was hand cut. That, fancy. Yeah, like, right. So like when I step down, that'll eventually go on my coronet.
Right. All right. Now that introductions are out of the way, since today's show is coffee themed, of course. For me, today's coffee of choice is Vermont Maple Bourbon by 8 O'Clock Coffee. And because of this show, I brought out the big guns. This is my new mug from my Westy Bestie Katrina. It is 24 ounces of beverage goodness. So I figured I would need the fuller cup for today's talk. So what about you, Sammy? What are you drinking over there?
So my coffee is actually from a local roastery, Metropolis Coffee Company. I can talk today. Jeez. It's a single origin blend from Mexico. It was actually, it was super nice. So it's really sweet, but I add a little bit of vanilla and a little bit of roasted cinnamon to it because I like that additional flavor. So yeah, support your local roasteries.
That's right. All right. Now we got all the formalities out of the way. Are we ready for this? We ready?
Let's roll.
All right, Sammy. What's it like being black in the SCA?
Whew, that's a loaded statement. So understanding that my experience is not going to be the experience of everyone else, first and foremost. So, being black in the SCA is really interesting. Generally speaking, the SCA tries not to view color, but it still exists because people are people. And we'll get more into that later because this is going to be this is going to be a whole big soapbox episode. And Cal and I were talking about this earlier, and we already knew this was going to be we're going to be sitting on a soapbox all day. So pretense is gone with that. So my experience being black is I really haven't experienced discrimination by SCA members. Right. But it allows me to see things that other people don't, specifically that white members of the SCA don't in their interactions with other people of color. Some of my very close friends are Asian Americans. I have 2 friends who are Korean American, and I've also started interacting more with some of our indigenous population, some of our First Nations population as well. But as far as my experience being black, I've not experienced a whole lot, no matter where I go, but there's always that there's certain things that I grew up with and that I was told growing up where it doesn't allow me to fully immerse myself the way that someone who is not a person of color, someone who's white, would be able to.
Right.
Like, I always have to kind of be on guard, at least to some degree, you know. And part of that too is where, you know, my mother grew up during the civil rights era. You know, Ruby Bridges is literally 10 years older than my mother, or actually not even that much older. She's like 5 years older than my mother, and she's still living. So like, so my mother got to see all of the things that, you know, that we read in history books, that we read in history books growing up, you know, modernly. And she got to hear those things on the radio or read them in the newspaper. Right. And so, I mean, so yeah, I mean, so that's a thing.
All right. So we had a comment coming out. I think you sort of brought it up, and I think you're right. I think and again, let me be very clear. I am very white. So I have, and I want the show to be very much about letting the people of color talk today, right? And I know you're not representing your entire culture, your entire race, but you are the one here, so a little bit you are. But I know my experience is nowhere near in life or in the SCA, nowhere near what you have experienced or anybody else of color's experience. Just because you're right, I have experienced privilege. I have been able to ignore a lot of the problems. However, I think you're correct. The SCA as a whole, and this is a comment I come in, is largely less racist than society as a whole. I think we can sort of agree on that. Like, I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying there's not problems. In general, we have the more better people than we have bad people, and so I think in pockets there are less problems, and we can see pockets of really good. That doesn't mean there are not problems, clearly.
Right. So, so with that, like, you know, it's all regional. Like, it's all regional.
Right.
You know, and it depends on too, like, you know, it depends on where you're at and whatnot. I've actually had more issues with. I've had more issues with travel to events or travel to practices or farm practices than I have actually there. Like, when. Okay, so case in point, I've got a couple of examples. I went to an event before COVID shut everything down. So the location for the event is literally 2 hours away from my house. Mm-hmm. So to give you context of where my barony sits, or where I specifically live in DeKalb, because my barony is very large. So where I live in DeKalb, so DeKalb is basically this tiny little pocket of liberalism surrounded by a lot of conservative country, right? Especially when you go south, you know, really south, north, and west of here. It's a lot of farm country, and traditionally more rural areas tend to be more conservative, right? Just because you have those family values and everything tied in with that.
I think the distance causes a big thing too, because you don't have as much of the intermingling.
Right, some of that too. It's not as
intermingling.
Right, exactly. It's not as integrated. It's not as integrated as other areas. Yeah. So that's exactly it. There's stories. So I was driving to this event one morning, and I'm in garb because I usually just go straight. You know, because when I worked my previous job, I usually had a very limited amount of time to be at an event. It's usually anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, and I have a 2-hour restriction that I put on myself. Because if I've got to drive for 2 hours to an event, I want to spend as much time there as possible, and with still getting back in time to sleep before work. I've switched jobs since then, so I'm actually like free on the weekends now, which is nice. Right, exactly. But in my previous job, because of the fact that I was trying to balance my SCA life with, and just my life in general with my work, I would go and drive out, you know, come home from work 6 o'clock, get up at 8 o'clock, roll out the door, and be at site by like 10 or 11. But anyways, I was driving out to this site that's a little bit west by southwest from where I'm at. So very much rural community. And I'm driving, just, you know, jamming out to my music, not really, you know, paying attention to the road. And I have this giant pickup truck flies past me, and like, And in the process of coming around me, cuts over in the lane, so I have to dip off a little bit to the gravel, to the forgetting what the thing's
The shoulder.
dip off to the shoulder a little bit so I don't get hit. And then as this truck is passing me, I see the big Stars and Bars Confederate flag on the back. I'm like, okay, that was a thing.
Which, let me pause you for a moment. That's just weird to me. Being someone who lives in the South, I saw more Confederate flags when I was in New Jersey and heard Sweet Home Alabama more times when I was in New Jersey than I do in Mobile. That makes no sense to me, but please continue.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah,
so we can talk about that. We can absolutely talk about that.
Sure.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
But I'm driving and I'm just like, well, damn. Okay then. But I mean, I had to pause for a moment and go, okay then. So I keep driving. I get to the city the city near the site. Like I drive through the city that I'm like on the main road going through there. Trump flag, Confederate flag. I'm like, great. So I'm not stopping here. I'm going to keep driving. I'm going to keep driving. So, I mean, I got to site and I was fine when I got to site, but I didn't really talk about it. And I just kind of put it in the back of my head, but like, I still retain this, like, okay, then this is not really a safe space for me to go, or I have to be careful when I head out there. And then of course there's a time that I went up to Michigan. I went to Detroit for a fighter practice with a close friend of mine. Actually one of the folks that lives 2 hours away from me in the Shire of Dark River, Master Wendell. He and I were doing a prowess tour, because as most fighters know, you need to travel to get better. You go out, you fight the people that you don't normally fight. And so we went to Detroit to do exactly that, because we went to the practice that actually Duke Branos is at. So, you know, we have a couple of Uber Dukes plus our current king there, and which was awesome. So went to the fire practice, had a great time at the fire practice, didn't have any problems when we were in Detroit at all. None. Right. So, but on the way back, I'm driving, we're driving at like 6 o'clock in the morning, because 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern, whatever. We're driving earlier in the morning because we have to get back before noonish, because I had to go to class and he needed to get on the road. So that's a thing. So I'm driving. I'm in front of me, roughly 2 truck spaces in front of me, because I grew up. Some of my friends are semi-drivers. Some of my friends' parents are semi-drivers. So I got taught the two truck rule really early, and I keep that in mind when I'm doing driving. Mm. So I'm driving actually roughly the speed limit, a little bit under, and I have cruise control on, because we don't really have anywhere to be super fast. We just have to get back to Illinois sometime before noon. No big deal. So we're driving, kind of seeing what's going on, and I pass Michigan State Trooper. Okay, cool. Well, I'm probably a good half mile down the road at this point, and he pulls out of the median, puts a siren on. Okay, cool, not a big deal. So bear in mind that, like, at this point, I was still working at my previous job, which was as a police dispatcher. Which we can talk about that a little bit too, and because that's a whole entire thing with race. Mm-hmm. But we're driving. I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe just got a call. I don't have the scanner on. I don't care. I'm on my day off. I don't care. So I'm driving. And I'm like, all right, cool. Maybe he's gonna fly past me. So I pull over to make sure that. So I'm driving. He's in the lane behind me. The hell? So I pull over. Okay, cool. I always keep my wallet in my side, and usually before the officer approaches, I can pull out my ID and everything and have it ready for him. And my stuff's reachable. I did that because, of course, all the things I've been told when I was younger. And we can talk about the talk later.
Right.
Is that definitely informs how some of my interactions are. But so I have this. So this cop comes up, and he is the stereotypical blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be interesting. Cool. So my hands are on the steering wheel because I'm waiting for him to approach. Roll down my window, put my hands back up. Hello, how you doing today? He's like, do you know why I stopped you or why I pulled you over? I have no idea. I'm driving back to Illinois. I have no clue why you've pulled me over. So he's like, well, so your tags are expired. I'm like, yes, I'm aware of that, and I'll be fixing that on Friday when I get my paycheck, because gas, tank of gas is like $30. Tags in Illinois at that point were $100.
Right.
So I mean, splitting gas with a friend of mine, it's a couple tanks of gas. I pay for one, he pays for one. It's cheap. We were also crashing with people. It's a cheap trip. I have things planned. We're good. So he's like, okay, well, where are you coming from? Like, well, we went to a medieval practice in Detroit, and we're heading back to Illinois. We're heading back to DeKalb, Illinois. Okay, well, it's like, there's a lot of trafficking and everything. I'm like, I didn't, but okay, now I do. I'm like, he's like, well, what's in the back? Because at that point, I had my armor in a tub. Master Wendell had his armor in a tub, and we had all of our weapons in the back. So I'm like, that's all of our reenactment gear. If you'd like, I will open it and let you see. I don't care. Like, I have nothing to hide. I don't care. Yeah. So he's like, it's like, I can't talk, it's like, can I pull you out of the car? I'm like, sure. I'm not going to tell the cop no, because I saw what happened to Sandra Bland, and I saw what happened to Philando Castile. At
this point, you're actually in the wrong. It's a legitimate stop.
No, actually, okay. So that actually is not.
You're correct. Okay.
I'll explain that in a second.
Yep.
So again, being a police dispatcher, I have access to police officers that I can ask about that and procedure. So at this point, okay, you've got me detained, but I'm not arrested. Fine. So he asked me to step out of the car. Sure, not a problem. So I get out, I talk to him, and he's like, do you want to sit in the car? I'm like, I don't. I'm going to sit over here. I'm good. Like, I'll stand on the side of your car, because to me, that's safer.
Right.
I am not being put in the back of your, because where his computer is, I wouldn't be able to sit in the front. I'd be sitting in the back.
Right.
You cannot get out of the back of a police car without them releasing you. You don't have me. I'm like, you don't have me. I'm not arrested. I'm detained. Which there is a difference in semantics, and we can, if you want, we can talk about that later. Because insider knowledge is fun. But we were talking, and he's like, well, can you stand here for a second? Sure. So he goes up to talk to Master Wendell. Master Wendell tells him the exact same thing I just told him. Because I'm guessing Michigan, because of I-80 or 94, they've got to do extra questions, whatever. I'm not sure about that particular process without asking. But I'm like, this was a needless stop. But okay, whatever. So he goes to talk to Master Wendell. He's satisfied with what Master Wendell says. He comes back and talks to me. So he asks me, so what do you do for a living? I'm a police dispatcher at Northern Illinois University. Would you like to see my department ID card? And I just saw his face go, saw this look on his face go, oh, fuck.
Yep.
Professional, but I could tell there was a shift. And I'm like, I'm like, okay. So he knew that the stop was bullshit. I was also wearing a hoodie, which was also, I didn't have the hood up, but I had a hoodie on too, which is kind of important to this, because black dude in a hoodie driving a fairly nice car. I drive a 2017 Dodge Journey. It's red, which is not my first choice for reasons, but whatever. I like it. It's my car. But I'm a black dude in a hoodie driving a fairly nice car early in the morning. Just leave me alone. But we ended up getting released. He just said, hey, just make sure you get your plates taken care of. But after I saw that mood shift, I kind of dug it in a little bit deeper, because he knew at that point that the stop was bad. Right. And I knew the stop was bad. And he couldn't really do anything other than just let me go anyways. Right. But I told him, thank you for your service. Have a great day. Because I'm polite. Right. It's a defense mechanism. It's very much a defense mechanism.
So the thought is, so had me in my hoodie driving that same car, that conversation wouldn't happen, right? So you were stopped for being black in Illinois, or being black in Michigan. That's realistically
driving while black.
Driving while black. That's DWB.
Driving while black.
Okay, so let's dig into this a little more. So we talked about, you and I talked about Gulf Wars a little bit beforehand.
Yep.
And so a lot of because we are a medieval hobby, and we need large open spaces. A lot of our events are in very rural areas,
Yep.
right? So Patrona asked, and I'll bring it up. So what are, obviously we talked about cops and dealing with police officers, but what are other concerns that impact our BIPOC members traveling to events?
So actually, real quick, for those of you who don't know what BIPOC means, it's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So that's important for people to understand. So it encompasses anyone who is not white.
Right.
So before we go into that, so
I also appreciate an easy acronym. I can pronounce that when it's an easy acronym to say. I appreciate that.
That's true.
Yeah.
So other concerns there are. So where to eat? If someone has dietary restrictions because of their religion. I have friends who are Muslim. I have friends who are Jewish. Finding a place where we all can eat, and especially like once you start traveling down south, where there's a lot of pork and there's a lot, both of those groups, particularly depending on their level of adherence to their religious beliefs, because there's different levels depending on the person. So finding some place to eat, finding some place that they feel safe. Even stopping at a hotel. Historically, places that are historically more conservative are going to be of concern or on alert. Pardon me. It's something that I've been traveling while Black most of my life.
Right.
My mother in fact hated it when I would drive down to Huntsville, Alabama. I would do the drive solo sometimes. But I did research. I did research beforehand to see like where would be safer for me to stop.
Right.
And the fact that we're gonna start going into a rabbit hole because there's multiple facets about this. So, as you notice, I am very well spoken.
Mm-hmm.
I am essentially a model minority. And that is something that lends a lot of credence to how I interact with people. And it's a thing. And actually, I'm going to address a comment that somebody is asking in the comments about a modern green book. There actually is. If you look up modern green book, like space, green book being spaced, there actually is one. There's a website. I actually saw that the other day. I listened to a podcast called Yo, Is This Racist? And I'm actually going through the backlog of all of their podcasts. And that was actually one of the things that is out there. Especially with things going on the last year where we had and continue to have a lot of brutality and a lot of killings of people of color, specifically, Black people, Blacks and Asian Americans, especially like recently. There absolutely is, there absolutely is that resource. There actually have.
If you were real quick, Sammy, can you address what the Green Book is? I actually didn't recognize that until I had to look it up a minute because I did not. I wasn't familiar with that.
So actually, before we started filming, before we started streaming, I actually grabbed my copy of the compiled Green Book. So the original thing is called the Negro Motorist Green Book, which it was written by a gentleman called Victor H. Green, and it literally was a guidebook for Black Americans who were literally migrating from the South out to other parts. So like whether you were going north or whether you're going west or going or north or west. So specifically for Black Americans who were migrating out towards like Chicago, towards Los Angeles, because that's where you have a lot of your heavy Black populations.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that. It's because those are the easiest, paved roads and easier access. Yeah. But the Green Book is literally a list of places that are safe for them to stop or get food or get gas. And it was modeled kind of after the Underground Railroad, where there, of course, all of us learned about the Underground Railroad in some facet when we were growing up. And it wasn't just one continuous underground thing. Underground being, subterfuge, like safe places to stop, not literally an underground tunnel. Um, so yeah, and a lot of so that, and there's also another part of that where it's sundown towns. Sundown towns are places where non-whites are not safe to be after dark. Um, so I mentioned the podcast "Yo, Is This Racist?" I actually just listened to on my way to and from work. Takes about 2 hours. It takes about 2 hours to listen to, but find the Juneteenth episode because one, they discuss what Juneteenth is, and then also they discuss some of the history of some of these things, like the Green Book and traveling while black. And it's kind of a satire show, but kind of not. It's a comedic look at racism, like modern racism, but also some of the history too. And it's a really thought-provoking podcast, but presented with humor because it's easier for people to digest. So
yeah, that's like that. I had to look that up a second ago because I was, being white, I've never had that problem. I have restrictions. I'm vegan, so I have things I have to deal with when I'm traveling too, right? I'm not scared to stop to eat though. There's a very different thing. Like, oh man, I can only have French fries here. Oh well, like that's a significantly difference than that I might get shot while I'm eating my burger, right? I get that. So yeah, I didn't know that was even a thing. Right. And somebody brought up that she's low key horrified that we still even need that, and I am too, frankly. Yeah. However, I think it's something to consider. So we have I linked the modern Green Book into the chat there. That's something I think that we as event planners, right? Those folks, the autocrats, we've started talking about doing research into event sites for disabilities, for travel and for like loading and unloading things and stairs. We've started considering that a lot more. I don't know it's ever come up of looking at the towns around it for those safe places, right? Yeah. So like I said, you and I talked about Gulf Forge beforehand. And so for those of you who don't know, Gulf Forge is in Lumberton, Mississippi. And yes, that is as redneck and rural as it sounds. It is. It's an amazing site, but the area around it is a little southern. Like now, I was telling Sammy, it is the immediate area around it is less bad than it maybe used to be, and it is. But also, I'm saying that from a very white perspective. So until I would like to see a black perspective on that in today's society. Let's go take a trip and see what it looks like, because there'll be things I won't notice that Sammy or somebody else would. But I think that's something really to start considering. I know that came up actually. So we had another, and I'll throw Meridia's under the bus here, but Gaddalop. So Gaddalop is an amazing event that we have at Fort Gaines down on Dolphin Island. It's a Civil War fort, and the whole thing, the Battle of Mobile Bay. If anybody's familiar, it's an amazing site. It really has that like castle feel. It's also ran by a super conservative Trump flag flying organization, right? And you're dealing with all of that to get to this site. Is it worth it, right? Do you have? So we even had issues to sort of off topic. We even had issues last year with bathrooms because it's open to the public during the day, which is also a problem because it's a site open to the public during the day. We had issues with putting criminal hygiene products in both bathrooms just because that was something we did, and the site owner actually pitched a big fit about it. So it's a thing, right? So that's a problem we deal with on a regular basis down there. That site, in my opinion, is almost not worth it anymore because I don't want to make somebody like you uncomfortable or not be able to go to that event.
So actually, we're going to talk about intersectionality for a second. So one of the things if you are not familiar with me, I am the person that does the Trans 101 for the SCA class. Part of that is because I myself am transgender. I'm a masculine identifying transgender individual, but I'm also black.
And those are separate things, but have similar problems.
Oh goodness, yes. Yeah. It's very much the thing. It's very much a thing. But intersectionality is so important to realize. Where it's, I have a lot of friends who are queer, because that's one of the circles that I hold space in. That's one of my circles. And talking with queer white people is very different than talking to queer black people.
Right.
And it's it's that whole intersectionality where it's like we understand that we have a common struggle. We have very similar struggles. One of them is based in prejudice. I mean, both of them are based in prejudice,
Right.
but one of them is based in racism and xenophobia, and one of them is based in bullshit teaching. I mean, everything comes down to education.
Right.
For one, I try to treat everyone with courtesy and respect. It's a thing. That's just my personal tenet. Like that is my personal tenet. I personally try to sorry, I'm reading the comments too as they're coming in. So I actually want to address one that just came in about Lumberton being redneck. And implication, of course, being that traveling through there is worse than Lumberton. Yes. So, case in point, I live right next door to Indiana. I go to Indiana frequently. I have friends that I love dearly there. I am not. So, first of all, Indiana is where the KKK was founded.
Right.
They have towns called Whitestown. There are towns that were literally created centered around white supremacy. And those are things where it's like, once you actually start, okay, so there's two parts to this. One, the thing with the modern Green Book and the Green Book, they are based on the information that you can find. Some of these places that are insidious and that are sundown towns, I don't know if I mentioned or not, are towns where people who are non-white are basically not welcome after dark, and you essentially have a target on your back.
Mm-hmm.
Or on your face, depending on, whatever. But there are places where you're not safe unless you're white. And a lot of those places, they have buried those parts of their history because they're ashamed of them. And they refuse to own them. They refuse to be accountable for them. Because all this comes down to accountability as well. The United States is terrible at this. We don't hold our forebears accountable, and we need to. And it's a thing that's complicated, but not so complicated. It's complicated by the fact that we have this. It's a thing. It's a whole entire thing, and it is it's a thing. Getting the sites can absolutely be hazardous,
right.
hazardous to one's health if you're a person of color. Like I have specific places. Like I visit, I go down to the St. Louis area usually once a month to visit my partner or one of my partners, and I have to choose where I stop. Like places that are safe. Places that are considered safe, based on the Green Book, the modern Green Book, and also too, what I hear from other people of color,
right?
Because a lot of there's a lot of different things to this. Like part of it is the oral tradition of passing information along orally, so it's not written down. And
because that modern Green Book essentially becomes a target for somebody who wants it. It's a list of target spots.
It's also targets, but it's also right. Like, the actual Green Book, when it was written, it was basically that was something like, you go to church on Sunday and like they would hand out copies.
Right.
It was like those black centered churches, or like, if you had white allies, because that's where a lot of these are. They're either black owned locations or they're white allies that have earned the trust of the black community around them. And I was starting to talk about earlier, some of the things I was taught when I was younger. So I grew up in Kankakee, Illinois, which is we kind of a saying here in Illinois where if you are south of Interstate 80, which kind of cuts it cuts the state probably about at a 45-55 percentage ish. So if south of I-80 is traditionally very conservative. It's very conservative on a lot of fronts. The area I grew up in, like, Kankakee is predominantly black. I am literally related to half of the people in town. Like legit, they are like half the people in town are my cousins.
Right.
Like through intermarrying or whatever. I have a big family. This is on my mom's side, just that. This is just on my mom's side. We're not even talking about my dad's side. But driving around in the Tri-City area, because there are 3 cities there butted up against each other: Bradley, Kankakee, and Bourbonnais. So Kankakee is predominantly black. Bradley is mostly blue collar factory workers. It's a factory town, and then Bourbonnais tends to be more upper class white. So it's really interesting, like driving in Bradley, where like, again, pulled over for driving while black. Like I'm just like, and being taught like, hey, you're a target now that you're driving and you're black. And here's how to avoid, getting pulled out of the car and getting put in cuffs.
Right. Which, I was just sitting there thinking, I know Count Seto tells a very similar story, right? And he also has a police background. I think he was actually a cop, if I'm not mistaken. And I was just thinking that we should get you and him and a couple others together and do a driving while black episode, and literally an entire episode about traveling. I think because there's so much to unpack, so much you really to deal with. That's interesting. That's just it. Again, it baffles me because I've had shitty interaction with the cops. I've never had that kind of interaction with the cops. Like mine's always been because I fucked up and did something. I'll be honest. Like it's
right. And I mean, and like speeding like 5 miles over the speed limit is really not that big of a deal, especially when in Illinois there's a 7 mile per hour buffer that's written into the state law.
Yeah.
Like I am that person that reads state statutes for that reason.
Well, I mean, it's one, because you need to know what they are, and 2, you have worked in police environments, so knowing those things is good.
Well, and
right,
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. I was gonna say, so I think we talked about travel a bit. Let's we have a couple of things I want to address. Because I think again, I think we could talk about travel for another full episode. We may just need to do that. So the question came up during the courtesan talk. So, courtesans being a thing of an excluded social class, right? With sex workers. Yeah. We have our BIPOC members that are excluded class based on race. How can the SCA, as a traditionally white space, right, actively encourage the diversification of our members? Like, what is the things we need to look at when we're looking at recruiting, maintaining, or recognizing our members outside of that white community?
Okay, so this is going to be a multi-part response because this is something that I think about a lot. So predominantly, okay, so first of all, there are quite a few people of color in the SCA. Mm-hmm. It ultimately boils down to representation matters. I personally choose to go to every demo that I can. 9 times out of 10, you're going to see me at a demo if it works with my work schedule.
Right.
And even if it doesn't, I will try and make it work because it matters. I'm actually going to tell you a story. So one of the a really quick story. So one of the last demos I did before everything shut down for COVID last year, we had a demo at our local library here in DeKalb. Being one of the 2 barons, I dress up in full. Like I first of all ask my group, do you want me I'm also a fighter. Do you want me in armor or do you want me in regalia? What do you guys prefer to have me in? What do you guys need more from us today? Do you need me to be a talking head or do you need me to be a fighter? I'm good with either. I just need to know how what I'm taking with me. Is really
which box do I need to grab today? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Which box do I need to grab to get? Am I showing up in garb or am I showing up in armor? Or do I need to grab the armor box? So, which I usually would anyways, because touching armor is amazing for kids.
Right.
But this particular one, like, hey, can you teach a class on wire weaving? Because I had started to learn. I was doing wire weaving at that point. And I felt proficient enough that I could teach a basic class on it. Like give the kids, enough stuff to work with, and I can start them on doing wire weaving. Cool. So I did that, and I was in my full regalia, which is actually the outfit that you had me that you showed.
Oh.
That's my typical demo outfit, and actually that was from that demo where I took a selfie.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
It was a good picture of you.
It's a good picture. It's fun. But that was actually from that demo where I was in some of my nicer garb, and I didn't take the ancient and honorable coronet because it gits heavy after wearing it for a while. But I took the leather ones, one of the leather ones I made for Honda and I to there because it kind of looks like a little crown. It works. But I'm sitting at the table after my class, and this young black boy comes up, maybe like 6 or 7 years old, with his dad. Hey, I want to go talk to the king. Well, I'm a landed baron, and I know that, but I'm not going to take away from this kid's. I'm not going to take away from his whimsy.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, I am the ruler of these lands. What can I do for you today? And it was one of those things where, like, previously as a fighter, all coronets do. Well, all coronets do look like, because I saw there's a comment in the thing. All coronets technically do look like crowns, but it is that presence to somebody outside of the SCA.
Right.
That, I mean, it's always that whole you punch up instead of down. But to somebody outside of the SCA, I look like a king or a prince.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the difference between our infrastructure, and that's okay. My job at a demo is to get them hooked. And that's so important to see somebody that looks like me, that has darker skin, that is not white. Because they see that person wearing a crown or a coronet or a tiara or whatever, and they think, hey, that's someone important. I can do that. I can be that. And that's something that's irreplaceable. Like, seeing somebody in power, especially when, and of course, we're going to drop a soapbox because I also do historical research. So, historically speaking, most history books are written by the victors or colonizers. Right. Specifically, those are so 9 times out of 10, those are going to be white people. Because England did a whole shit ton of colonization.
Yep.
And fucked up the world. So there's a lot of things that have... there are a lot of things that have been lost to the ages because they've been destroyed. So seeing examples of people of color as leaders, that's something that we didn't grow up seeing. Like, unless you're looking at like Egypt or you were looking at the Western Asian cultures, Eastern Asian. I'm sorry, Eastern Asian cultures, where you have Japan and China, Korea, like all of the all of the ones that had monarchies, right. Either figureheads or that's their structure.
But I've even seen some white ass Egyptian folks in textbooks. So let me just like, whew. Yeah,
whitewashing is a thing.
Yeah.
Historical whitewashing is absolutely a thing.
Right.
And we'll get into that in a second because that's a thing, especially in Europe. So, yeah, like, but seeing somebody, having somebody that looks like me or looks like them,
right,
is something that's amazing, and especially when you keep seeing that person, it's not just a thing.
Right.
One of the things that the SCA did actually to encourage diversity and start showing that side is they have on the front page of the SCA, they have a picture of Count Seto when he won Crown.
Right.
And he's kissing his wife, and it's a start. It's a start. I know that there was a drive to have more pictures of people of color doing things in the SCA because guess what? We exist. We exist and we do a lot. There are several people that I know who are peers, who are incredible individuals, who have a wealth of knowledge. And I'm very lucky personally to have met those people because their grind has been amazing, has been insane. I actually a local knight who I knew outside of the SCA and re-met when I joined. I've talked with them about their experiences on the path to getting knighted, and again at Gulf Wars. On the list field, they were called the N-word, and people wouldn't take a shot. People wouldn't take their shots, and all of this other stuff, where it's just like, I don't necessarily know how I would handle that, because, yeah, no, I don't necessarily know how I would handle that. I mean, actually, I do know how I would handle that. Quite frankly, if you're not willing to take a shot from me because of the color of my skin, or even more so because of my gender identity, I'm not going to lay stick across you, and I will forfeit the fight. You do not deserve the honor of fighting me. You don't deserve that honor.
Right.
And honestly, I'll forfeit because my honor is not for sale.
Well, and I know there are quite a few in the chivalry that would want to know about that and would probably deal with it, and it with some very harsh conversations if that came up.
But that's also now.
Right.
That's also now where we have a driven focus on, well, one, it's written into the SCA's code of conduct, essentially.
Right.
Where basically, which basically boils down to don't be a dick, and that, don't be racist, xenophobic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's written into the code of conduct. At that point, it was very loosely written.
Right.
But it's also, so that also brings up something called microaggressions. Mm-hmm. So microaggressions are not overt. They are very subtle things where, like, for example, with me, I've heard the whole, you talk so well for a black person. That's a microaggression.
Right. Yeah, a buddy of mine the other day, who's I've known since high school, was black, and he was our whitest black guy.
Yeah,
we had two black guys. It was like two different. One was a senior, one was a freshman. And when the senior graduated, he literally passed off the title of whitest black guy to the other guy, and did it very publicly in front of people to make them uncomfortable because it was a thing they were sick of dealing with. So yeah, he made a big rant about it the other day because he's sick of hearing it, and I don't blame him. But,
yeah, I mean, and there's other insidious things too. Of like, I've been called an Oreo. I've been called the whitest black guy. People know. I've been told I speak very well for a black person. Yeah, I mean, when we talk about hair, even. Okay, so there's multiple things about that. So it took me a very long time to start loving my curly hair. I have naturally curly as hell hair, but it took me a long time because of representative media that says that, like, your hair should be straight and shining and blah blah blah, and basically it's reinforcing this concept of whiteness.
Right.
And I'm over it at this point. I'm just over it. I like having curly hair. I do get my hair relaxed. Yep, the whole "wait, you're black." I was saying that in the comment. Yeah, I get that too. I've gotten that too. Like, right. Wait, you're black? Yeah, I'm also a whole host of other things too, but that's only a small component of me. But yeah, like I mean, like, I get my hair relaxed, but it's mostly so I can relax the curl because I like being able to comb through my hair because tiny little spirals make it really hard to comb at times.
Oddly enough, I'm actually familiar with that problem.
Right. The mess? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Same thing.
Yeah. It's a slightly different texture, but damn it if it's not a problem. Right. All right. So I want to cycle back real quick. So we talked about demos a bit. And you talked about representation demos. I know it came up in South Downs over the last few months when we talked about a lot of our DEI classes and sort of how to do those better. I know as a white person, my problem with dealing with representation demos is I don't want it to feel like it's tokenism.
Yep.
Right. So that's the issue. And so I think the thing I've sort of just realized is you're doing it because you want to, right? Nobody's asking you to come, right? And you're a bit doing it because you're the one of the barons, so it's sort of your job as baron to show up, right? And that's at least useful. How do I, as a white person, how do we start doing those maybe in the less white or the more white groups? How do we reach out to those communities when we don't have we don't have black folks hanging out. We don't have enough black people. We don't have enough Asian people. We don't have enough of those people of color that want to do those things. So we get stuck in this cycle of only recruiting white people because that's all we have to recruit with.
So honestly, expand your search. Expand where you're promoting. So I am, if you are, okay, so multiple things. So this is a multifaceted thing. This is a multifaceted thing. Part of it is the materials that we have published.
Right.
I actually created so when I started doing demos up here more consistently, so part of that too was I've done demos for a very long time, even before I stepped up as Baron. The neighboring group Ayrton, I partnered with a member of the Shiv, and who works for one of the local colleges, and we partnered together to do to find space for our group. And because the college that he works at was like, hey, we have this giant space, come do the thing.
Right. So
we partnered together and did the groundwork for doing everything. But because of that, I was the face, which is great and gave me a position of privilege to be able to direct how I wanted the group to go and how I wanted it to be represented. So one of the things I did because I knew that the official SCA language and brochures are very white facing.
Right.
They're very whitewashed. I know that the last couple of years that the SCA corporate has asked for additional materials so we can start changing that look, but I haven't seen those come out yet. So I created my own. I reached out to some of my friends of color. One of them actually is Zara, who is the Society DEI officer currently. Mm-hmm. I've got lovely photo of her in an Ethiopian garb, and another friend of ours who's local. Both women of color, both insanely awesome and intelligent people, and have a wealth of knowledge. So, like, seriously, go talk to them. But one of the things I did, because the community college I was at, that we were promoting at, is extremely diverse. I couldn't tell you like how many different ethnic groups were there, like outside of J random white guy. But it was heavily diverse. And I knew that if I want people to come and participate, there needed to be people that looked like us.
Right.
So, well, I'm a photographer. I very rarely have people take photos of me, just because I'm usually the one holding the camera. More so now because I'm landed nobility, and photos happen now. But when I created our brochures, I made sure that either one, you couldn't tell the race of the person,
right? Because
then that specifically, like if somebody has a closed helm or like their face was obscured or like you couldn't see their hands. So I made sure that one, you couldn't tell their race, or it was an explicitly minority individual. So women of color, people of color. I made sure that they were front and center because everyone knows that the middle age, traditionally, if you go to Ren Fair, your local Ren Fair, you walk around, you see a lot of white folks, but you don't usually see a lot of people that look like us, and that needs to change, right? Because and kind of segueing too, we existed in England because that's where all of our Ren Fairs are centered on. They're centered on medieval England. We existed then, same as we do now. And guess what? We weren't just slaves. One of the peers in my kingdom, Mr. Serafina Sinclair, modernly she's known as Harley DeRoche. If you go online and look, she's got an article that she wrote that is literally called "We Were There," that she wrote for the State University of New York, but for their fashion department. So if you go and find that article, she lists examples from period where Black people were prominent. And guess what? We weren't just slaves, which is, contrary to what the American diaspora would have you believe.
I put that link in the comments just now too.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we actually it was the other comment we had on the on one of the shares. And I'm just going to read it because I think it made me chuckle and then go, All right, that's the thing we need to talk about. So it said, I never noticed that I was different until I went to the Dickens Fair and Ren Fair, where some people said I didn't look like I was from Elizabethan England. Sure. Okay. Her response, and this is a Asian of some sort. I couldn't figure out what she is clearly Asian looking. She said, I said I was an import from Greenland. That shut them up for a while. Interestingly, when she visited Denmark, they also thought she was from Greenland and had a Danish last name. So there you go. So apparently, there it is.
So funny thing about that, there were people of color that were Vikings.
Right.
There were darker skinned individuals that are in their indigenous populations, specifically the Shmi. If you go to look them up, the name of the indigenous Norse population is spelled Sami. It is not Sammy, which very similar to my name, not the same. Sami, but it's pronounced Shmi, which I didn't know that until I was talking with a person who is a member of that indigenous population. Go figure. I learned something, and I love learning. So, but there's also stories in the sagas of darker-skinned individuals. Like if you want to talk about Norse. So, I play in the SCA. My feature focus primarily is Rus Viking. There's a couple of reasons for that, mostly because of my own ethnic background. Guess what? Hi, I'm 25% Russian or Lithuanian technically, but when immigration happened and everything else, it gets complicated as you go through history and Russia, and taking over things and whatever. But anyways, that's a really fun tidbit that I get to drop to people, and they're kind of like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "Oh yes, yeah." I can trace back where my relatives came over and immigrated to the States, at least partially. So it's, yeah, we existed. Long story short, we existed. We have always existed. If you look back at the history of the world, the cradle of the earth literally is in Africa.
Right.
From an anthropological perspective, everyone came from Africa and migrated out, and the whole reason we have races is because of literally mutations.
It's a distance from the equator. It's a sun. So if you look that was a thing. Like I was it's been a few years ago now, but like when I looked at the racial map, and it's a distance from the equator. That's all it is. Yep, that's all being black is because you happen to be close to the equator. Your racial line is closer to the equator, and it's because it's brighter and hotter there.
It's more specific, like how much sunlight you're exposed to.
Right. Yeah. It's because it's where the sun sits in the science, and right. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's one of the things I really appreciate recently the SCA, and this is I think Zara has a lot to do with this. I'm not. And Zara and her team. I'm not going to give her credit.
Giada and Zara have done a lot.
The fact that the SCA is now opened up to more than just Europe. We've removed the references to just medieval Europe. Yep. We're seeing more Mongolian and Scythian and all the East Asian stuff. And I've seen more classes recently on African and the Islanders, and there's so much of that available now that hasn't existed before.
So to that note, so I actually participated a week ago in the First People's Talk. So I wasn't on it, because it was centered on the people who are in part of the First Nations communities, because it's not just one community; it's a lot of different communities. So did you know, incidentally, because speaking of whitewashing and whatnot, in the United States alone, there are over 500 registered and recognized tribal communities. It is so, and this is actually, so if you go and listen to the First People's Talk, they actually talk about this too, right. Where one of the people who is in there is an anthropologist, which I thought was amazing, and could actually speak to this professionally. But there are also at least double that, or at least that many that are unrecognized by the United States, that did not either refuse to sign the the various treaties or just screw you, we're not falling in line. And there's a lot of expected conformity. So there's specifically a lot of expected conformity to whiteness. If you don't speak English, you're not accepted. If you don't do X, Y, or Z, you're not accepted. Like the standards of beauty, the standards of communication, and whatnot. So it's a thing. It's it's that whole standard of it's that whole standardization in terms of what America perceives as beautiful and what America perceives as right.
Right.
And there's
All right, I want to address a comment because I've seen this, and I'm gonna do this so that it's me on the show addressing this. The SCA has had a lot of non-European personas for years, and I'm not sure who this person is, and I'm not sure. There's been a couple of comments I've seen, and I'm not gonna be rude about this. You're correct, but also wrong at the same time.
Yep.
Yes, there have been lots of non-European personas in the world of the SCA. However, the percentage of them and the discrimination and hate, I guess, against them has also existed.
Yep.
And so I can speak to specifically even from Meridies, and again, being in the South, we are very Viking in this winter and very Roman in the summer. That's just the way this kingdom is. We have like one Asian persona here and one Mongolian persona here, and that's it. That is changing.
Yep.
So I appreciate your comment there, but you're wrong. Maybe your area is different. I don't know who you are, where you're from. Maybe it's different, and I'm happy for you and for that area.
So actually, I'm going to speak to this. So so how I found the SCA, my original origin story, not the one I actually tell. So I have two instances where I found the SCA. The first instance was back in 2010-ish, because it was after 2011, whatever. It was very early. Yeah, it must have been 2011 because I was living in Naperville. So, and actually I found him before that, but that's neither here nor there. So earlier in my life, earlier in my life, I was originally intending to be a translation major. Mm-hmm. I'm incredibly proficient in Spanish. My comprehension skill is much, much better than my speaking skill, mostly because I haven't used it, which I know, shame on me, whatever, but opportunities, whatever. And when I was in college, like I said, my original second major was, I was studying Spanish for business and translation and minoring in Japanese, because for a very long time, I found anime, loved anime, started learning to speak Japanese and have translated Japanese songs into English. Like, bought myself a Japanese dictionary, bought myself some of the resources, started teaching myself Japanese, and I did the thing.
Right.
So anime was the kind of that gateway drug to me learning about Japanese culture. Pardon me. So fast forward to college. I was part of so Northern Illinois University is something called the Foreign Language Residency Program, which is fucking phenomenal. You basically spend a semester or a year. You spend your time on your floor and at dinner. You have dinner. You're supposed to go to dinner 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday. And you're basically fully immersed in conversation in the language that you are studying.
Right.
Well, of course, I was Japanese and Spanish. Because I had less experience with Spanish, because I was fairly proficient at that point, I chose to sit with the Japanese group. And it wasn't just speaking the language, it was also learning bits of culture. Mm-hmm. So we had nights where we would watch some of the movies. Like, I actually found one horror movie that I can actually watch, surprisingly, out of that, which is awesome. But it was sharing bits of culture, like, religion, food, modern life, all of these different things, history. And so when I found the SCA later, I actually found it because I was looking for Japanese immersion things to kind of keep going with that, because I was out of school at that point, and because life happened.
Right.
So I was looking for Japanese immersion things, and I was also looking for archery. So I found an SCA event that was happening literally 30 minutes from my house, like a 30-minute drive. Like distance wise, it was like 2 miles away, but it was like 30 minutes from my house. I told my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, hey, I'm going to go over and do this thing. Do you want to go with me? She couldn't because of work, but I went anyways and did the thing. And because I was fascinated, there was a Japanese, themed event where it was fully, the group it was the Barony of Ayrton had done their site up in various parts of Japanese culture. So like the main building they had set up like a tea house.
Right.
And it was mildly terrifying for me being a person of color walking in and seeing a lot of white faces.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what I was walking into. That was a thing where I'm just like, I kind of heard, my brain kind of went, I'm not expecting this, but there's a lot of Japanese culture stuff. Okay, I'll roll with it. And I thought about like walking in and then leaving. But like I stayed and I had a great time, and I actually stayed after and talked to one of the guys doing the Japanese Yumibo class, because I was just fascinated by it. Just me, random person walking off the street. I don't even think I was in garb for that event. I can't remember. It's been so long, but I vividly remember walking in and seeing like everything done with the lanterns and like the paper facade, and it's just like I remember being just the main space where they later had feast and their gate. And I'm like, I remember seeing this. I'm like, this is really freaking cool. But then like walking on, going, there's a lot of white people here, and I see very few Asian. I see very few Japanese people, but everyone's in kimono and hakama, and I'm so confused. So I'm like, okay, this is a thing that's done. This is awesome. I was originally planning on developing a Japanese persona. I was very strongly dissuaded from doing that when I came to the SCA the second time. And I'm like, well, they're like, well, they don't really do that here. And it's like, and it's cultures that have contact with England and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, okay. So I kind of thought about it for a while, and I'm like, well, okay, well, my great-grandfather, prior to immigrating, his last... So Andreas had a question about the event coordinated and run by a person of color. I have no idea, because I have no idea. I have no idea about that event, because I just randomly looked something up on the internet, and I had no experience with the SCA at that point. So I don't know, but I know it was very well done, and I was impressed. But
still, even though it was an event, let's assume that, right?
Right.
You still walked into a space that was a clearly white space, right? I think even I walking that as a white person would have been thrown off seeing a Asian themed event and everybody there was white, right? Now, I'm not saying we should go hire a bunch of Asian people to come fill out the events. Right? I'm not saying that. That's a whole different problem. Yeah, but it's really tough. And I think it's okay. I actually had a question come up I want to address about this. So, and this is again not something you can answer because this is not But Zara does a pretty good class list. I was actually trying to find a link on this. So, what are your thoughts on non-persons of color portraying a persona from colored regions? Right. So like again, this is not something you can speak to. This is appropriation talk. What are your personal thoughts on it?
I was actually going to say,
yeah.
Honestly, okay. So it is very hard for me to talk about this topic specifically because as a black person in America, I don't know where so other than I don't know where the black component of my history came from. I legitimately have no clue. I don't know. I can tell you, I could talk about Rus representation all day or Rus Lithuanian Slavic representation. I can tell you about Slavic representation because that is part of my history. I know where that part of my history came from. I can't talk about. So it's a multifaceted. So it's a multifold question for me. One, I can't really talk about specifically the African component of it. I can't talk about the African component of it because I don't know which indigenous population either side of my family came from in
Right.
that component, because we were brought over as slaves. Our histories are gone. They were taken from us. I can't speak to that. What I can tell you is that go listen to Zara's class on cultural appropriation versus appreciation. I was there when she actually did the first run of it. The first one was amazing. She had a fully packed room, small classroom. It was completely full. Like there were those of us who stood and overflowed out actually into the hallway. It was such an important topic then. It still is an important topic. She has refined it. She's actually added to it as well. Go listen to it. Go watch it, because there's a way to do it. There's a way to appreciate a culture without being appropriative.
Right.
And ultimately, you need to talk to people in those communities. I'm also going to reference back to the First People's Talk. They specifically talk about that too.
Right.
I will say also, so I'm going to speak to that because I was part of that conversation. I was present during that conversation. For the First Nations component of it, do not wear regalia that you haven't earned.
Correct.
In other communities, it exists the same thing. Look in the various Asian communities. Look at the Mongols. Look at the Scythians, even, because look at the Scythians. Look at the Koreans. Look at the Japanese. Look at the Chinese. There are certain things you cannot wear based on what your age is, what honors you've attained, what honors you are granted.
Right.
And the same thing actually with names too. So I'm going to use names as a great example. So if my full SCA name is Samson Muskovich. Muskovich is a family name for me. My great-grandfather, that was his name. I am still actually trying to find out when the name changed over in Lithuania and Russia, in the Slavic lands, because it's a mess over there. Like, the history is a mess because it goes back and forth a lot. The Vich part of my name is an honorific.
Right.
So at some point during my family's history, that some honor was bestowed to some member of my family, probably someone who was male, for whatever service they had done on behalf of whatever. But it is a family name that gets it. Slavic names are interesting because they get passed down through the generations. That is why I am able to use that name.
Right. It's almost like an augmentation of arm. Like we see an augmentation of arm.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing. It's just they just did it via names,
Right,
because
exactly.
they didn't track heraldry like a lot of the Europeans did.
Mm.
So yeah, I think the thing that whenever I've asked that question or heard that question asked, the two things that I've been told is to make sure it's educational. Right, you're doing it for an educational reason.
Yes.
And to do your research about the thing. Right. That's the first two. And then also, there's a difference of a current culture and a past culture, right?
Yes.
So there's less of a risk of Scythian stuff right now because there are no Scythians that exist anymore.
So the general rule of thumb is if it's a dead culture, case in point, the Scythians,
right,
you're probably okay to do it, but do it in the context of education.
Right.
Like Cal said, do your research. If it's a living culture, so a lot of our First Nations groups, they're still alive and kicking, and they have specific rites of passage that you have to do before you earn, for example, the right to wear a roach, or the right to wear beads, or the right to have an eagle feather. Don't wear eagle feathers, by the way. One, it's illegal in the United States to possess them unless they are registered. Only indigenous populations can have them specifically because of the religious significance. Don't do the thing. If you like to wear feathers, I know that Clan Blue Feather's a thing. Blue Feathers are not going to violate anything. That was discussed during the First People's Talk. Go watch it. Seriously. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of knowledge drops. There's a lot of there's actually a lot of things that they talked about during that talk where I was just kind of sitting over here going, Damn. That's really similar to my experience.
Right.
Yeah, that was a thing. That's it's a thing.
So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is make sure you do your education, right? And that's realistically that's sort of the I think that do your research, get some education would actually fix a lot of problems we have. Whether talking about race relations or tokenism or the ableism or whatever, insert ism here, right?
Right.
But yeah, that seems to be, and I'll link Zara's talk on appropriation. Yeah, you're right. She does a really great job of it. Frankly, go to that page and scroll through her classes. She does a good job of her classes.
Yeah. Honestly, go to the DEI channel.
Yeah, that's the one I linked. Yeah.
Yeah. Just go through the DEI channel. There's a plethora of stuff that is just informational, and it's not necessarily about. So part of it is very much doing the advocacy for how do we ally better. Like how do we ally better? Honestly, sit down and shut up and listen. Sit down, shut up and listen. Right. Ask questions. A lot. I mentioned earlier about like part of how I know about where places are safe to drive, or where places are safe to stop specifically, is because we talk. People of color tend to talk to one another, just because it is. People of color tend to talk to each other because, like, hey, like, even though you're an Asian or you're a part of an Asian community or Pacific Islander community, or you're a First Nation part of a First Nations community, we are all interconnected because we are all oppressed by white supremacy, and it is it's a thing.
Agreed. All right, so I think we've hit all things. I mean, clearly we could talk about this for a few hours because there's so much to really break down here. Yeah. Margavati brought up earlier. I just want to kind of bring this back, the tokenism thing. Definitely something that she's discussing. Margavati is the DEI officer for Southdowns, and one of here in Meridia. I think she's also the deputy for the Kingdom as well. She's been doing an amazing job here in Meridia. They do a monthly DEI class for Southdowns, and they're working to rebuild a lot of stuff at the Kingdom level. But it's definitely an issue. With her, she does South Asian, she does Indian continent stuff, and it's difficult for her as a white person to do that. Even though she's actually in the culture, she does the actual dance and like does it, not just she does it mundanely. But it is difficult for us to be allies. I think she made a good point there of our thing is to protect the spaces, right? The best thing for me to do is provide this platform, right? This is what I'm hoping I can do.
Right. So to answer that question, because I also realized I didn't fully answer it earlier. Right. There's two parts of that. One of them is sit down, shut up, and listen, but also provide a platform.
Right.
Like exactly you're doing. You're providing me a platform as someone who does not. You're providing me a platform for someone who is not affiliated with the DEI office to talk about racial issues. And I am grateful for that because I understand that I am privileged. I have the privilege of my place. My place is a landed noble. And I appreciate that because it allows me to speak truth to power a little bit more easily than others. Honestly, I'm going to talk about something with that too, with speaking truth to power. A lot of because it will tie back into everything else we've talked about, like especially with the SCA being a heavily white-dominated space. And also it'll also partially, hopefully, answer something too about how do we promote visibility. And because promoting visibility is not just about recognizing people for awards, because unfortunately, whim of the crown. It is at the whim of the crown.
Right.
What I can tell you is this: write your award recommendations. Tell people why these people these people are deserving of recognition. And that applies to anyone. You see someone doing something really cool, recognize them. it can be something as simple as saying, hey, thank you for your time. Give them a token of appreciation, which can, like I said, be as simple as saying, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. You can give them literally a small token.
Mhm.
I, in fact, have a little box of things, which, I guess that's not the full box. There's also stuff that I'm working on. But, that's actually not, I don't have a box. It is a bag. I switched stuff. But I have a small bag of rings that I made that I can give to people as tokens saying, hey, you did a great job.
Right.
And it's something small that I can do to show them recognition and say, hey, I see you, fam. But regular word racks. And if you see somebody, especially if you see a person of color going out and talking about their culture that they are studying, it's like I have a friend up in North Shield who I've been having a lot of very heavy conversations with, has a lot of great perspective. And she was recently recognized for her studies in Korean culture by her crown, and I thought that was amazing. And actually, I had a friend tag me and say, "Hey, watch Court tonight," because I didn't know why. But yeah, like if you see somebody doing something like that, recognize them. Like send an award recommendation. It promotes them. Like talk about them on Facebook, talk about them on social media. Like if you once we're actually back to doing stuff in person, if you see someone doing something really cool on the list, go promote them. There's a gentleman up in Avakal, I think he's Avakal or no, either Avakal or Eldemir, I'm forgetting which, who has an amazing fighting kit that he displayed online. That is literally, it's a historical representation of his tribe. Like
the chest plate.
An amazing kit.
Yeah,
that he did all the research for, that he built to SCA spec based off of his tribe. I'm currently working on a kit too. It's admittedly it is mostly based off of, it's kind of cosplayish, but I'm doing the research to delve further for M'Baku because I really love that kit. I love that aesthetic. But I'm doing the research beyond that because M'Baku's character design in the Marvel Cinematic Universe was based on, like, the costume designer went to Africa and talked to tribal members. Right. And I'm trying to do more research on the tribe that his design was based off of because I want to know more. And I want to try and we are the Society for Creative Anachronism. That is my that's one of the reasons. That's one of the ways I'm trying to integrate it because I think it's cool. I handmade a grass skirt for this.
See, now you got to get that done so you and Stelios can fight.
Right, sure.
Like that would I'd watch that fight. Frankly, that'd be fun.
He'll probably stomp me all day. He's
that's beside the point entirely. It'll still be entertaining.
I'll give it the old college try. But yeah, no, I'm some of the things too. Is like I'm also studying Middle Kingdom Egyptian, and I'm working on garb and a persona for that because I think that's a really cool culture. Right. It was essentially when ancient Egypt was at its height for the arts, and I find that fascinating. I'm trying to also develop a period appropriate persona period appropriate, like based on my rank and everything. By the way, speaking of Stelios, go check out his YouTube channel because he is someone who has found his voice and knows
and likes to use it and knows how to use it. Yeah.
Yes, he has a voice. I am still finding my voice. And actually, that's a thing. Like I am learning how to refine my voice, and this is one of the ways I'm doing is I'm talking. I educate. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready this morning, and a lot of what we see is like activism is very like in your face. It doesn't always have to be. My form of activism is teaching.
Right.
It's education, and so it's speaking out about issues like all of the murders of Black people that happened over the last year, a year and a half, because this was pre-COVID too. Over the last year, seeing all of and hearing about all of the violence against the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities because of COVID. seeing all of those things and speaking out against them. And yes, the Celios and Lila channel. That's the one I was talking about. So
That's I was trying to find a link to it. Give me a second. I'm hunting it down. So
sure, but that is how I can. That's how I choose to. That's how my form of activism works. Is I talk, I have conversations. If we weren't in the middle of COVID, we'd be having this conversation over literally coffee and treats, or I'd be feeding you a meal. So one of my long-term projects actually is I'm studying a new world, so to speak. So an American culture that is still a living culture that was present during the time of the SCA, because guess what? Slavery existed in the United States during the time period that we study.
Right. It
didn't just start at 1860 whatever. It was present since it started. So it's been present since the 1400s. So the culture I'm studying is the Gullah Geechee, and the Gullah community in South Carolina is still a living culture. They're fighting very hard to maintain their cultural identity. And we're probably gonna have to do a part 2 on this because there's a lot of information. Yeah. But before I actually do, I want to do a Gullah feast, which, so I did a soul food feast a few years ago, mostly because it was just being silly and kind of having fun. But now
I remember we talked about that on the Toffel night. I love that story. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. I did a soul food feast, and it was a lot of fun. I had a great time, but I want the educational component now. Like right. I've gotten a lot more sure of myself as I've gotten older, and I've gotten more experience under me. And also, I like to feed people, and I don't want to necessarily feed people like here's this stick of crow, but it's that here's this crow, and I'm going to smother it, and I'm going to smother it, and I'm going to cover it, and you're going to enjoy eating that crow because we need to have these hard conversations. Right. We need to have this conversation about the fact that the Gullah community is descended from slaves. Right. And the fact that slavery did exist in the SCA, that in the time period of the SCA. And I'm not talking about, indentured servants that you see in Greece and Rome and Egypt that were prisoners of war. I'm talking about the slavery that we fought the Civil War over, right, and that people are still denying to this day.
Right. Yeah. People who were kidnapped and brought across an ocean and
yes.
Yeah.
And had their culture ripped from them.
Right. Yeah, which is the whole thing. So we'll end on this. I actually went to we took Kisa for her birthday over to Pensacola. We've got a old a textile mill over there. It's a historical site. They had put up a new display inside of some of the family's records, and they had found some of the original owners and some of the people who were there. They had found their slave records and had them displayed, and they did a whole we get this is messed up. Here's what we know. Right, and I appreciate that as much as it's because it's a shitty place ran by slaves. It was a bad thing. I appreciated that they made that effort to put up a display of here's what we know about the slaves that were here. Here's the people that came over. That was really cool. I appreciate those little things, and it's little things to me, right? It is. But I know it's for people who need to see that, it means a lot more.
It all goes back to representation.
Right.
Representation matters. If you want actually really good representation actually of immigrant communities. So there are 2 series that I basically binge watch, and I will sometimes go back and re-binge. The first one is on Netflix, Ugly Delicious. So it's David Chang. He goes around and he's got kind of co-host-ish things. I personally think that season 1 is much better than season 2. It's got a different vibe, but Ugly Delicious is on Netflix. Go watch it because he has some of those hard conversations about I actually in preparation for this I rewatched one of the episodes where he talks about fried rice and the origin of it, and it talks specifically, and this is, bear in mind, this is in 2019 before COVID happened,
right?
So but he talks about the racial bias against Asian American communities And he talks to people who are Chinese, who are Korean, who are Japanese about their experiences. And it's a fantastically done show where it's not in your face aggressive, but it's very much, it makes you sit and think. And then the second one is on Hulu. It's Taste the Nation by Padma Lakshmi. It specifically focuses on the immigrant communities that formed America's food. And that's actually where I learned about the Gullah Nation. And I'm like, what? This is a thing. So I started doing my research, and I'm like, and it's just kind of taken off from there for me personally. But those are my two go-tos. Understand that I'm a huge foodie, and I love knowing about where my food came from, not just in terms of the food origin, but also the history of the culture.
Right.
And I could probably put up an entire list of just the various shows I've watched over the last year-ish of COVID that are food-centered, that the street food series, both the Asia and the Mexico ones, are fantastic.
Right.
Where it's we love tacos, Taco Chronicles too. And what's so important about these two is that they are centered on the ethnic communities that created them. And they're literally filmed by people from those countries and in those languages. And I'll turn on the subtitles and I'll just listen, because I'm I have no idea what the actual language is. I don't speak these languages. I don't have an experience with them. But the fact that they have chosen to retain the original language that was recorded in, and then add subtitles for the American viewer who doesn't know very many languages, is awesome. And then the fact that they're giving me a venue to watch films in other languages and experience that culture. So then now I'm going to go back. Now I'm going in speaking of which, Indian food. There are 12 different kingdoms in India.
Mm-hmm.
They are centered in regions. It's not just a big diaspora it's a huge diaspora of food, but it's not just Indian food is a broad thing. There are cultural things. So now I'm kind of drilling down and saying okay, what type of Indian food do I actually like? Which culture do I want to focus on?
Right.
And
that's the Texas versus, Southern versus Chicago barbecue conversation. Those are different things. It's not all barbecue, folks, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So we're being begged for a part 2. So I think we're gonna go ahead and call it for the day, and we'll get that scheduled, because I think there's more to talk about. Maybe see if we can bring Seto and Stelios and a couple others on. Just that we'll have a talk for it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask though with that. So if you guys want to have a part 2 of this, ask questions.
Yeah.
Give us questions that you want to answer, and then it'll give Cal and I kind of a better idea of what we're getting into, one, and then also who to bring on.
Right. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll probably put up I'll go ahead and get an event or something up, or I'll put a poll up or something on the page. So go to the Facebook page, which by the way, so let's do that business real quick. Make sure to follow, comment, subscribe to those things. So if you're on YouTube, go down and click subscribe, click the little notification bell over there. If you're on Facebook, go to YouTube and do that. If you're on YouTube, go to Facebook and find the Kalbardr's Corner Facebook page and look that up, and make sure to like it there. And all of that, we appreciate those likes. Make sure when we're going live next, but also so you can see everything we're doing. If you want to support KK Productions and all the things that we do here on this channel and all the channels that we support, look us up on Patreon, patreon.com/KK Productions. Toss a little financial support our way, help us make these shows better, and also just get some cool swag and things. There's stickers now. I've got stickers. My face is on a sticker, Sammy. How cool is that?
That is pretty cool. So now I have to check that out, because I didn't know.
So I haven't. Logan sort of flashed one the other night, because we also have Ask the Nights Live on there as well. So we're still working on getting the Redbubble set up, but yeah, we have stickers. So that's going to be coming out to the patrons here soon, and just some more stuff coming. So look that up. Coming up on the channel, let's see. So originally I was going to be doing a 12-hour live stream for the next Coffee with Cal, but because I have a new job starting tomorrow, I've chosen to cancel that because I need a little less stress in my life. I'm working to fill that slot with another coffee talk. So it probably won't be the part 2 of this, because we'll need some time to prep for it. But I'm going to get something in that slot. But next Sunday, for What Makes a Night, I'll be joined once again by Duke Sean to talk about fealty. So it's a this will be the Knights versus Master of Arms conversation on that. So that's always I enjoy that series a lot. So those are fighting related hard conversations, but still conversations that are really good to have to get out of the stick talk, and just it's a good series. Look that up on our YouTube as well. Yeah, that's what I got. So again, click all the buttons down there. Look for a part 2. Sammy, you have been amazing. Thank you for doing this. One of the things I saw the comments was thank you for the emotional hard labor. Right, I know that it is not something that we should expect from the BIPOC community, but we appreciate those of you who are willing to do that.
So actually, real quick before we head off, so I've got 2 things. One, while everything was going on last summer with the ridiculous amount of killings of Black people, there was a I'll have to find the link, and I'll shoot over to Cal so you can get up to the channel. But there's a list of resources for white allies to basically their books and their different resources online, like different podcasts. Go check that out when he gets that posted. Also, How to Be Anti-Racist is a great book. Go read it. It was written by a Black man who studies race relations. Go check it out, or go listen to it if audiobooks are more your thing. But yeah, like Cal said, like, share, follow, awesome. Also, Yo Is This Racist? Go check that out too. It's got a lot of information, a lot of knowledge drops. I learned a lot about modern Black history from it, and it's just like stuff that I didn't even know that, like, my mom taught me a lot, but I'm like going, damn, okay. So yeah, go check out those things.
There you go. Do your research, read books, find things, people, ask the questions. So, all right, well, I have finished 24 ounces of beveragey goodness, and that is an empty cup.
I have a 32 ounce, so I'm still.
Oh, still working on it. You were talking a lot. I was not, so I had time to drink more. So thank you all for joining us. This has been Cal and Sammy in Kalbardr's Corner. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good one, y'all.